Welcome to the second of our three-part winter series for Knoxville Library this winter and spring. We're really happy to have you this evening, and we're glad that the weather was more cooperative today than it was last month. If you haven't been with us before, welcome. We're really glad to present this batch of local hunting stories of wild night creatures that inhabited this area a couple of 100 years ago. And we have some very willing, helpful volunteers that have agreed to help present some of these stories. So we're ready to go ahead. We're going to give you just a little bit of background so that you can understand what the stories are about before they start. There has for a long time been a very well-known story. Sometimes we've heard it in rhyme, as we'll hear it tonight written out in the form of an epic poem. Sometimes it's just told as a story, but it's really pretty interesting. And I have found out we do have some kinfolk related to Lovell Short with us this evening. So your assignment, should you choose to accept it, is to find out who that person is later after the story. I don't know that either of the Cunninghams are related to Lovell Short. Are you? Okay. Around here, who we're related to is of utmost importance sometimes. But anyway, we can go. So we have Linda and Bob Cunningham here on the left side of our wall, and they're going to be presenting Lovell Short's Ride. This is not Lovell Short, but this gives some feeling for what Lovell Short may have been looking like as he was being chased by the panther around the Little Marsh area. This is a picture that we found online. Lovell Short is on the left, his son Alfred is on the right. This was put up online. And here we have an image of the 1875 atlas, and Lovell Short inhabited portion of the map on the right-hand side where Chatham Township joined.
What I was going to point out, in the poem you'll hear that we didn't have roads and it was trails. It's not really true, but one of the interesting, and I don't know how many people are local, but Short Hill Road is the hardtop road from Savensville to Little Marsh. That's not a very old road, but there's a road north of that at the end of Trimmer's Woods goes up over the hill and comes down at the end of, let me take you the other way, at the end of the marshes, you turn up Short Hill Road, then there's a dirt road to the right. That road was dedicated in 1834, so would have been there during the story. And you've got an interesting thing when you look at these old roads is the road beside the marsh was never put in until 1869. So that dirt road that's not used very much at all is one of the oldest roads in that area. And that's all I want to point out, that he, from his house, could have went north and there would have been a road to Little Marsh from there.
Thank you. So that you can kind of see, especially if you use your super duper glasses. There's an L period short right along that line at the top red mark, and an A short a little bit further south of there, so that would have been Alfred, his son, and that would have been the tracts of land that they were occupying in 1875, which is about 50 years after the story took place. For our second story this evening, Eileen Robbins, who is sitting in the middle with the orange vest, is going to bring us a short story taking place in the Cowanesque Valley right near here, just east of Academy Corners. And this is taken from Munzel's 1883 History of Tioga County, which was the text was probably written by Charles Tubbs from Osceola. And Eileen lives near where the story would have taken place. And our third story will be read by Alex Hartley, who is sitting on the far right over here. And it is a story that involves a couple of different named men from the Osceola area. a little further east. He's going to read a little bit about Captain Ebenezer Taylor, and then also a story about Samuel Tubbs. The same story was from the 1883 Munsell History of Our County. And Alex is a descendant, I believe, of Samuel Tubbs, and he resides on both of them, both Mr. Hartley, Mr. Captain Ebenezer Taylor, and Samuel Tubbs, and lives on a tract of land that was originally settled by the Connecticut settlers in his family around 1800. So here we have county, the northern part of our county, and this is a 1994 tourist map which has some more of our familiar type of roads on it. So down where you see Beechwood Lake, there is a place called Hornsby Hollow Road, and you can see that that is near where the Little Marsh area where the township line is. Welcome. There's a couple of
There's a seat here, or there's a seat in front.
Or there's one in front, whichever one you want, Norm.
We got Earl moved.
Yeah.
There you go.
And where you see the circle around the word Ingham, that Ingham Mill comes into the story of the Lovell Shorts ride. There was a grist mill there and a textile mill also along Route 49 now as we know it. And then moving toward Osceola, we can see a little bit of what is called Windfall Brook. And so that is the setting for just kind of getting a view for what's where. Next slide. For the story that Eileen will read, it refers to a place called the Grand Deer Lick. And the Grand Deer Lick was somewhere along the steep bank behind what is now Rice's Bus Garage. If you go up Merrick Hill Road, the blacktop south out of Academy Corners, and you get up to where the Rices have their bus garage, there's a stream behind there with a very steep bank. And it was somewhere along there, I don't know exactly where. And there are some other notes of interest that sort of are worth pondering if you are that kind of person. Notes that I found interesting to share, having to do also with the comparison of the bounties being paid over the years for the pelts of wolves or panthers. And there's also a little bit of a discrepancy. One story says that the settlers never used dogs to hunt, and just a few pages later he describes in detail numerous times where they used their packs of dogs to hunt deer and wolves. So those are some interesting things we can keep in mind. Again, this is Osceola Township in that same 1875 atlas, which is enhanced to show with the blue line where the Windfall Brook comes down and joins into the Cowanesque, which comes into one of those stories. Julius Seeley II is the son of Julius Seeley the first, and he is the only Seeley that I got a picture of. I'll just put it that way. So he would have been the grandson of the settler.
Dear friends, just let me take you to the days long, long ago, when our forests decked our hills and vales, and wild beasts roamed to and fro. When to see a squaw or an Indian was not an uncommon thing, or to hear the savage eagle flap his powerful, mighty wing. Ah, many, many changes have passed since those days, and gone, as well as these, are our forefathers' ways. We live not as our forefathers did. We've made very rapid strides. Our little remnants of woods, but smaller beasts now hide. As a child, I used to listen to the stories my grandfather told of the many thrilling adventures of daring deeds and bold. But the one of which I'll tell you sank deep into my mind, and searching the annals of history, its like I do not find. Now, to begin for you my story, let me take you to Pennsylvania's hills. As I behold their grandeur, my heart with rapture thrills. For 'twas here my grandparents lived and loved, and my parents in later times. Ah, that I could do justice to them in pretty prose or rhyme. But it was not to dwell on the scenery of the men and beasts to tell, but 'twas in Tioga County where the ranges run parallel. My grandfather's farm lay in 2 townships, with the townships line to divide. Chatham is on the eastern, Clymer the western side. 'Twas in 1835, I know not fall nor spring, that unto my grandfather befell this blood-curdling thing. To carry you back to those bygone days when roads were but paths in the wood, when horses were scarce and vehicles scarcer, horseback was the way to go, the only way one could. Now grandfather had a business call, what, I do not know, but to the little town of Tioga he was called to go. In the early morn he mounted Cub, a gray bespangled with specks of black, for he knew that he could go, and he knew that he'd get back. For Cub was of the pioneer stock, he could do and then more, strong of muscle and fleet of foot, proud of the burden he bore. He would do his all, as my story will show. No one could have expected more of any beast, however old, though seasoned to the core. Now, Tioga laid away to the east, some 21 miles or so, and there and back in a single day was all a horse needed to go. But midnight would have found grandfather home, and here have ended my story, that had it not been for the wicked part, the part that won Cub's glory. Tired out, within 2 miles of home, traveling slow and slack, Cub stopped, then started at Grandpa's command, when a panther sprang on his back. Grandpa was a hunter. He was a master of the wild, but in this cowardly warfare, he was as helpless as a child. His only hope was in his horse. Oh, could he hold? Tired out, and but a baby horse, grandfather's blood must have turned cold. But Cub now needed no urging. He was ready to do his best. He needed no whip nor lashing. He did not care to rest. Away he went like an arrow, Mr. Panther in full chase. Ofttimes dear old Grandpa felt his hot breath in his face. He sprang from tree to tree, making terrible, awful haste, and Grandpa and poor Cub had no time to falter nor waste. Ofttimes he caught poor Cub with his terrible mighty claws, but Cub only ran the harder. He never made a pause. The blood ran to his heels from the wounds his enemy made, but yet he never faltered. He could not be stopped nor stayed. The minutes were like hours, so terrible seemed their plight, and thus raced beast and beast through the quiet, peaceful night. The panther gained at every leap, yet Cub ran on like mad. Oh, which will win, which get there first, must have been thoughts grandfather had. With the panther nearly a hold of him in the terrible woods without a light, it seemed that he must be devoured. Oh, the horrors of that night. There was no hope of rescue. No one his troubles knew. Oh, would it never, never end? Would the horrors ever be through? Oh, how little we trust our Savior. I know not if grandfather prayed, but truth it is, without knowing it, a friend his death had stayed. On the Bill Taylor place, some heaps had been set to burn, and Cub ran straight through them. He did not swerve nor turn. The panther dared not follow. He turned the other way, and Grandpa and Grand Cub had surely won the day. Now Cub was at this time a colt but 3 years old, but he had showed his honest worth. He had proven himself pure gold. And Cub was the hero and sufferer. Grandpa suffered only from fright, and he was petted and doctored and honored from that night. And he had done what few horses ever do. He a life had saved, and that alone entitled him to an honored place and grave. No need to say he got both of those, and love and care to the end, for throwing all this aside, Grandpa was to all animals a friend. Had Grandfather been a coward, here would have been the end. But he must have said, "I'll have him. I my home and friends will defend." He located the wily chap in Panther or Hornsby Hollow and set his traps to catch him. He had no track to follow. And cunning as Mr. Panther was, he got into Grandpa's trap, and 3 paws were all he had when next he took to the track. Grandpa found the paw, but his game had gone, and where? For 2 long years they saw him not. Were things thus to be settled? Could Grandpa call it square? Perhaps he would have had to, had not his brother-in-law, about 2 years later, found the track of old 3 Paws. Uncle John Hackett, it was who found the track, and Grandfather and he soon started out to bring his old hide back. Now, perhaps this will be hard, if not impossible, to make it clear how those brave and skilled hunters brought old 3 Paws to his bier. 'Twas not until 8 miles from home they struck his track for sure, between Middlebury and Tioga. His hide will be ours to cure. They camped upon his track, and next morning away they went, and twice they crossed the Tioga before that day was spent. Between Mansfield and Tioga, they first the river crossed, then between Tioga and Lawrenceville, and but little time was lost. On the hill south of Elkland, they spent the 2nd night. Next morning were up and going as soon as it was light. They crossed the Cowanesque east of Ingham's old mill, and found the old fellow's tracks as they climbed up Knoxville's north hill. The dogs now proved their worth, as you will presently see. They tracked him fearlessly on until he tried to climb a tree. And there he met his fate. He got fastened in the root, and must answer for his wickedness, for to see him meant to shoot. And were these men to shoot, it was goodbye old 3 Paws, and if they did not shoot, it would surely be because they had nothing with which to do it. Their time had come to laugh, for hard as had been the hunt, they could still find strength to chaff. As I remember Grandfather, I know he still was game, for had he not been so, he would have lost his name. His name might have been Pluck, had he been an Indian born, for he was Pluck through and through, midday, night, and morn. Now, you know those old trusty rifles must be loaded from the muzzle, and for our hunters today would be something of a puzzle. And when those veterans fired, it meant, "You are my game," for steady were their nerves and sure and true their aim. They both took sight, said, 1, 2, go. Down fell the wicked panther. He didn't have a show. They carried his hide into Knoxville the afternoon of the 3rd day and measured it fair and square. 7 feet 9 inches is what they say. Grandpa had gotten revenge. They say revenge is sweet. But tired, oh so tired he must have been, tired from head to feet. As for Cub the colt, did I tell you? 27 long scars he wore for life, as a proof to all who saw him of his gallant race and strife. And at the age of 34, 31 years after his race, they laid him away with honest tears in his last resting place. This may not be a success as a poem, but it's true in all it relates. The race and hunt were real events. Also true are the places and dates. I hope I've pleased a few by writing it at least, and telling how Grandpa got 3 Paws, and not 3 paws, his feast.
We started in just a second. Should I start?
Hunting we will go, hunting we will go. We'll catch a fox inside of a box and then we'll let him go. Hunting we will go, hunting we will go. We'll catch a bear and wash his hair and then we'll let him go.
Bears, deer, elk, panthers, otters, wolves, minks, wild cats, beavers, and other wild animals abounded in Deerfield. The early settlers used no dogs in pursuing deer. A hunter was sure to find one within easy range, either standing in the river, browsing on the hillsides, or at one of the numerous licks. The most noted of these was the Grand Deer Lick, near the residence of Isaac Sutton. A schoolhouse is also located near the place. It consisted of a salty spring on low ground and a wooded knoll nearby, upon which a blind was erected, behind which the hunter concealed himself. Hundreds of deer have been killed here when they came to lick the brackish water. Mud licks were more numerous and not so much frequented by deer. On the North Hill, below Academy Corners, there is a cave popularly known by the name of Bear Wallow. The tradition is that it was a residence and safe retreat for Bruin. It is impossible to trace to an authentic source, although the name that still attaches to the place would seem to indicate that such was the case. There are, however, a few stories of encounters with wild animals that are perfectly authentic. In the winter of 1806, Ebenezer Seeley had his hogs
They're sleeping.
should have skipped the hogs. Oh dear.
It worked very well in practice.
Well, what, shall we go on?
Oh, you gotta do this one.
Ebenezer Seeley had his hogs taken by bears.
Oh, back to the bear.
One after another, to the number of 8. He determined to save the old sow and build a log pen and put her in it. One night, about 10 or 11 o'clock, he heard a loud squealing at the hog pen. His 2 sons, Julius and Elanson, aged respectively 17 and 13, went hurriedly out and found a bear in the pen.
My thumb doesn't as fast as it used to be.
The bear had the hog in his embrace.
Okay.
The bear had the hog in his embrace. The bear had the hog in his embrace and was trying to lift her out of the pen. Julius seized an axe.
Oh.
Where is it? Here it is. Like this one. Hey, it's even got blood on it. And he dealt that bear a blow upon the back, embedding the bit of the axe in the meat. Can you imagine? The bear at once let go of the hog. Taking the axe with him. The axe was found the next morning about 10 rods from the house, and a rod is 5.5 yards, so you can do the math.
165 feet.
I see. All right, 165 feet from the
That's
house.
why you're here, man.
Remember that, because there'll be more rods. The remains of the bear were found in the woods near the North Hill. Reverend David Short settled in 1806 upon the farm now owned by the heirs of Ard Hoyt Bacon and lived there until 1813. His home was upon the bank of the river and his pig pen near the door. One morning, just at the break of day, he heard a pig making a furious outcry. And he went out and found a bear trying to carry it away.
I think you're doing this for me on purpose.
He seized his rifle and shot the bear from his door. In 1812, Reuben Howland, then a young man, heard a dog barking in the woods. About 100 rods north of the main Cowanesque Road. Upon going where the dog was, Reuben found a large panther. Right. On a lateral limb of a large oak tree, about 40 feet from the ground. He left the dog barking up the tree. Went to the house of John Sweet, who lived where Lauren Carpenter does now, and got him to go and shoot the panther. Sweet had a short gun he called his Hessian rifle. He fired 2 or 3 times with this gun before he brought the animal down. The state paid at that time a bounty of $8 for killing a panther. In this case, the bounty was divided by consent of the parties, Sweet getting $4, Reuben Howland $2, and Elance and Seeley $2, because he owned the dog that discovered the game. Thank you.
I was particularly pleased that Ellen asked me to do this reading because these people are my ancestors. In November of 1817, Captain Ebenezer Taylor, while hunting near Tom Lick, shot at and wounded a deer. Now in this case, a lick is defined as something between a stream and a rill. And I had to look up what a rill was, and a rill is a little stream that's no more than 12 inches wide or deep. So Ebenezer followed it towards Camp Brook. After a while, he noticed a fresh wolf track ahead of him. He sat down and waited for the wolf to overtake the deer. He crept along carefully up the brook, and when near the state line, saw the wolf snatch a mouthful of meat from the deer and then step upon a knoll and eat it. This he repeated several times while Taylor drew a bead on him and killed him. The next night, he set a trap by the deer carcass and caught another wolf. Taylor drew a bounty of $60 each upon the Wolf Scouts at Bath, New York. Now this, as near as I can tell, this took place up Kent Brook Road and probably near the Red House Hollow Road, because that's where the Taylor Cemetery is. And he would have gone north towards the state line. Where this Tom's Lick is, I really don't know. Now, Samuel Tubbs Jr. is the next person we're going to talk about, and Samuel Tubbs Jr. was Ebenezer Taylor's son-in-law. He married Ebenezer's daughter Permelia. Samuel Tubbs Jr. in the fall of 1820, with his dog, started a large buck out of the swamp near the present residence of George Tubbs upon Briar Hill. Briar Hill is the opposite way from Camp Brook. If you were to go to Osceola and turn right, and then take the first road to the left, that would be Briar Hill. The buck was fat and ran with difficulty. When overtaken by the dogs, he stopped and fought them. And then he ran a short distance and again renewed the fight. They thus proceeded along the ridge, alternately fighting and running until they reached the side of the windfall next to the river. The windfall is that hill. As you would go across the river bridge, it would be on your right in Osceola. Here, the dogs got the buck down when Tubbs stepped astride him to cut his throat. At the first touch of the knife, that buck arose with him on his back and carried him down the side of the hill, through the brush towards the river. As Tubbs weighed about 200 pounds, the deer sank under his weight while crossing some logs on the river bank, and he thereupon dispatched him. Nathaniel Seeley had his sheep hovel where the residence of Hoyt Tubbs now stands. And I have no idea where that was. I looked, but I couldn't find anything. In it, his sheep were gathered every night. As late as 1835, the wolves made a descent upon it and gained an entrance before 9 o'clock in the evening. They were frightened away without doing any material damage.
Thank you. We appreciate all of those stories. Sometimes it's interesting to think about the bounties that were paid, and my understanding of life in that time, especially up until really the Civil War around here. We lived under largely what we call a barter economy, which meant that people didn't have a lot of cash, and they didn't carry cash. They traded for molasses for potatoes and lumber for maple syrup or something else that was usually a perishable or a non-perishable product. And so anytime that we read the amounts of the bounties, those bounties were probably being paid in cash. So the local governments, either state or probably New York State, was paying a different bounty than Pennsylvania was. But it was worth the trouble to go to get that cash bounty. And to us now, you know, living in the era that we do, sometimes we might look at that as, you know, we won't cross over into how some people view, you know, various things having to do with hunting and killing animals. But that time, that cash bounty was worth splitting. If you got a certain lump sum, it was worth splitting different ways.
And I just did a little, when you hear they got $8 for a wolf or a panther, who would spend 2 nights out in the woods for $8? And if you Google what $8 was worth in the 1830s to now, it's like $150 today. But land back then, you can hear different prices, $2.50 an acre, $4 an acre is what I come up with in the 1830s, and you know, there's 7,000 acres in 1822. north of Knoxville, it was sold for $100. Yeah, well, that was earlier in 1800s, and it was sold for $2,000 in 1822. But, so if you figure today, you know, just for large acreage, $2,500 an acre, well, $8, you know, would be worth $5,000 in land today that you could go out and purchase. So it was worth spending 2 nights out in the woods.
So well, thank you to all of our readers, and I did want to say that if you are interested in joining us next month, we will be showing a film called Nessmuck, and Dr. Largy, who organized the movie and put the movie together, it's very well done, I've seen it. That will be here, and Dr. Largy from Wellsboro plans to join us that evening for that film showing. So if there are any questions that you had to do, it is, yes, March 21st. So the date is up there. So again, let's give our readers a round of applause. So thank you again for coming, and I think I'm gonna hit the lights and we can stay and visit, and we can even put up some of the slides if anybody wants to look more in detail at maps or talk about their neighborhood or things like that. We can do that for a while yet, and it's not snowing, so it shouldn't get slippery on the roads today. So